right, Kendra? Going back many years.
I thought you were sailing off into the Maine sunset.
Well, sort of.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. Can you hear me in Pecos Hall?
Yes, we hear you.
Excellent, thank you. Happy Friday to everybody and good morning. My name is Gerasimos Rosados. I am the acting director for the Oil Conservation Division, and I'm also the acting chair for the Oil Conservation Commission. Today is April the 11th, 2025. We are continuing with our evidentiary hearing that we have had all week. I will read off the cases as I have every day this week. These are the consolidated cases by Goodnight Midstream and Empire, New Mexico, and the case numbers are as follows: 24123, 23614 through 17, 23775, 24018 through 24020, and 24025. Mr. Hearing Officer, we transfer the hearing over to you. Thank you. Just as a reminder, Mr. Hearing Officer, today we do need to end by 3:45.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Rosados. That was going to be my first question and only question. All right, we're on the record, correct?
Yes.
All right, great. Mr. West, I'll remind you that you're under oath, and I believe we left off with questions. I'm sure that Dr. Ampoma has been up all night. No, all right. All right, so questions from Dr. Ampoma.
Good morning, Mr. William. My name West.
Good morning.
Okay, so I'm also William, professor, New Mexico Tech. Thank you for your testimony. So I just want to start by asking that you did not provide more like any new testimony, but it's more consolidating all the consultants' findings and then the position of Empire in your testimony.
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't understand it fully at the beginning.
Okay. So I just want to know that, or just want to confirm that in your testimony, it's just a consolidation of all the consultants' findings, that you are more or less putting it all together to summarize Empire's case.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I will go through your direct testimony, the self-affirmed statement. I'll go through that and then I'll come to the slides. So I will try not to repeat as much as I can. Okay. So I'm on page 2 of your direct testimony, and some of them I'll try to read, or if we can bring it up, that'll be much, much easier. On item number 3, way down, you describe that the Greenberg oil and gas and water production caused an influx of San Andreas water through natural fractures as Greenberg reservoir pressure dropped with a corresponding 18.5%. So that'll be on the next page. So I'm on page 3 right now. Yeah, if you can go down. Good.
Okay.
Yeah, right there. Okay, thank you. So corresponding 18% drop in the San Andreas reservoir pressure prior to water injection in 1986. No withdrawals from the San Andreas in the immediate. So that portion Is it your testimony to the commission that there were never any water supply wells prior to the 1986 pressure measurement prior to the water injection?
That is correct within the bounds of the EMSU unit. I can speak for within the bounds of the EMSU unit, but I don't know if there was something off structure somewhere else a ways away.
So you're just talking about just the boundary of the MSU, but you don't have any evidence that there were no water withdrawal wells outside your boundary.
That is correct, sir.
Now, so if you look at that statement, entire statement, more or less from the three, my question to you is that XTO, let's say Chevron, operated this field for a very long time. Why is it that none of these discussions were found clearly found in some of these reports, especially with regards to the natural fractures contributing to the influx?
I'm sorry, what was the question part of it?
So my question is that XTO or Chevron operated this field for a very long time.
Correct.
And throughout the testimonies that we've listened, in the week 2 now, there were a lot of emphasis that Chevron really did do a thorough job. That is from your experts. So I'm asking you, why was the influx of water into the into the Greenberg as a result of natural fractures not clearly stated in any of the reports that have been reviewed by the commission?
I think there's a lot of those reports of where there's historical plumes and different things that go up into it. Mr. Lindsay's PhD describes it in there where there's fractures and communication in between there. So I think it's like page 1001 through 1004. And then also when you get down the formation of the AGU and those documents, it's been into evidence. It shows, it describes also the same pluming things of the fractures and the communications between the St. Andrews and the Grayberg, and then also the 96 NACE report, which is the corrosion report that has a lot of the stuff in there from Chevron, where they describe the barium sulfate problem of communicating up through. That those are all well-documented things that Chevron really documented over the time. Dr. Lindsay was there at the formation of those fields, was the geologist on staff. And so he's, reviewed those cores and, has lots of fracture studies on them.
I do know your position, if you listen to Dr. Lindsay's testimony, we went through the lab paper, and as you're saying, Chevron documented an influx through the wellbore, and they described how that process more or less went about. And that is one way. I'm not saying that the fractures might not contribute, but throughout the testimony, I'm just looking for the catch word, the catch evidence, to prove that. Now, let me ask you, do you believe that only one well, which is the well EMSU 679, showing some evidence of fractures, and then there was another well all the way to the other side that also had core, and I'm sure you know the well I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're talking about the
Rebel or something like that?
one to the far left that goes deep down into the St. Andrews.
Yes. So that well did not have a lot of fractures compared to that of the EMSU 679.
I can't say I remember. I remember fractures in both. And since then, also, Dr. Lindsay's looked at the RR Bell, which is the other one that goes across there. And he originally didn't do a fracture study on it because it wasn't an oriented core to have the more in-depth fracture study, but he's reviewed that core and the photos, and you can see that, vertical fractures through that, transition zone of going from the Grayburg down into the St. Andrews.
Are you saying that the Arbel also did have extensive fractures that was presented to the commission by Dr. Lindsay?
It was not, he had not did it to present to the commission, but since then he has reviewed it, and I've seen the photos and I've seen his interpretation of the fractures, and there's fractures through there also.
Yeah, but that was not presented to the commission. What
true.
was presented to the commission that we all saw was the EMSU 679 do have fractures in there. Now, my question to you is that based on your extensive experience, do you normally just use one data point to make a decision?
You can never use one data point to make a decision.
So that makes it also difficult for me to really think about, let's say, one well having fractures in there. And even if you look at the Arbel well, there wasn't much evidence shown to the commission that there's extensive fractures in there. So the connectivity, it's not really clear, right? The connectivity is not really clear. So that is why, the commission was asking about the additional characterization work that Chevron plans to, and that Empire plans to embark on to really prove, let's say, some of these issues that has been raised to the commission. Okay. How much emphasis do you put on Dr. Backwater's modeling and his testimony?
It's a data point, right? So I'll refresh on your previous question there a little bit. So we're looking at all the data points. One thing we can look at is the cores and say, okay, we see some fractures there, right? So that's one potential thing. We look at the historical water production and go like, this extra water does not make sense, right? Why you would have this extra water up structure unless it's coming from somewhere else, right? It just is not flowing past all these other wells and they're not producing all this water. And then all of a sudden up on structure, you're producing water. So you got these unexplained plumes that are, historically pretty well documented. Luckily, I mean, a lot of times you don't have this vast history in a field is what we do here. So we've got those, and then we've got the, also another proof is that whenever you're forming the barium scale, that you had to have the sulfate. You had the barium in the initial Grayburg water, and then you had the sulfate that could only come from the St. Andrews water. If it was coming from the goat seep, it doesn't have that sulfate, so you wouldn't form the barium. And, that's documented a few places. And, back to that love paper of it coming up from the bottom, just remember the wellbore construction, it kind of indicates it's coming up from the very, very bottom, but you've got 150 to 200 foot of shoe track of pure cement in the bottom of the wellbore. And that's where all your cement's circulating up around. So that's the most solid part of the well from anything. So you had to come through the perfs. And so you have different perf zones. Now, whenever you're talking production, a lot of times you're saying it's in the wellbore because that's where it ends up. But you could have been coming through, the lower zone of the Grayburg, and most of these are completed in more than one zone in the Grayburg. So, when they're talking about the mixing in the wellbore, well, it's coming through the reservoir and it's mixing there, and that's where you have the pressure temperature to be the right mixture to really get that barium sulfate to form. So, make sure I don't get myself lost. I got to come back to your second question on it. So there's, I guess, repeat the.
Yeah, so I was asking you a general question before I start digging into it. So I was asking you a general question that how much emphasis are you putting on the history matching effort, on all the modeling effort that Dr. Backwater presented to the commission?
Yes. So you do extensive models, and that's, a very big part of your background. I mean, whenever I was a young engineer, I did start out wishing that I would be a reservoir modeler, and then figured out that doing eclipse models on offshore reservoirs or whatnot, 3D simulations, decided that wasn't for me. But, so I think a model, you try to predict, what's going on in past performance. I mean, models aren't great to predict, I think, future performance. You're trying to match historically. So let's try to take it into context as going like, okay, we put a model together and then we go, what do we got to play around with to make it work, right? You got to do some adjustments. You take some hard numbers, and we talked a lot about reservoir characteristics down in the San Andreas, but we didn't really talk a huge amount in the Grayburg. But there are cores and stuff and core samples in the Grayburg up there that you got perms over 1,000. So you got really, really high perms. And like the Love paper says that you have really high perm streaks. And that's, some of the problems with the water flood in zone 1 and 2. And so, he adjusted his model that way. And then you had to try to do a mass balance of where the water's coming from. And he couldn't get it to match, as he says. And he had to poke some holes in through the barrier between the San Andreas and the Grayburg. So he adjusted, I think, like 99 cells out of 35,000 to get these little breaks into the top, and then he achieved a match. So you take the model in context and you go like, okay, can I explain that in the real world? So then that's when you start going back and going like, hey, geology, do we have any cores going across there? And they go, okay, yeah. Do you, can you relook at this core again and see if possibly there's fractures there? And they go, yeah, we see vertical fractures that can happen through that barrier. And then you look back of other historical performance and go like, is there spots in it that historically, made more water in areas, and see if it gives you insight to what may be going on in the reservoir. So I take Dr. Buckwaters in that context, and I do respect him as a modeler. I mean, he, built the software and things. He's by far past my abilities as a modeler. So, and while you could always make a model better, and, there is time constraints to build, the model, that he could have put perfs in, he could have did, different pieces of it, but he was on a tight time strain. And as you can probably appreciate, a model of that size takes a long time to put together and build. So I think it gives a good context of clues into what may be going on into the reservoir.
Thank you for the explanation. And then also clarifying that he more or less adjusted probably 99 cells out of the total cells.
Yeah, like 99 of them out of like 34,000.
34,000.
On that, when what we're talking there is on that that horizontal permeability, right? Between the, between the layers of the Grayburg and the St. Andreas.
Well, so I did not hear in his testimony, or probably it wasn't, I thought that he more or less applied the same vertical permeability. I give you, when you say that the Greenberg do have higher permeability, so probably 500 millidarcy that he used in that range more or less makes sense. Now, the problem that I had
Mhm.
was putting a KV of about 100 millidarcy before he was able to get the movement of the water from the San Andreas to the Greenberg.
That's only in a few cells.
Yeah,
So
it
that's
was
not that
now
aware.
during his testimony. I don't think he made mention of, I just trying to create a permeability streak. He just said, I use KV of about 100 straight up. I don't think it was clear in his testimony that it was just on few cells, honestly.
I do agree with you that he wasn't very clear in his testimony that that's what he did, but we could pull up, the piece, the models and the evidence, and those layers are there. And you could see if, they pulled up that one summary table that showed the higher perm, the vertical things, and then it had your vertical permeabilities. And he pretty much had 1 millidarcy through all the Grayberg ones. And then for the layer in between the Grayberg and the San Andreas, he had varies. And the reason being, most of those are 0, except for where he had those, high perm streaks to get the water to match.
During the cross by Mr. Rankin, when I saw the modeling, I was like, wow, this is going to be awesome. Until I saw the cross going back and forth. So it was on the screen, the parameters, especially the permeabilities that were utilized in that model for the San Andreas specifically to prove that there is a movement. So there is evidence there that the commission can look at, and then also take into consideration what you were telling us today. We do not have the models. All that we have is the testimony that was more or less provided to the commission.
Yes, I understand.
Now, so on same on your page 3, you talked about page 3 of your direct, and you highlighted that more or less in red. So EMSU 660 pumped 3 barrels oil and 1,057 barrels water on January 10, 2006 from the San Andreas interval. Now, my question to you is that does this mean that the ROZ can coexist with water injection?
I think this is probably indicating of where you're in that transition zone and you have those barrels to be able to flow, right? And so that's, quickly flushed out from a transition zone if you had water come through there into a ROZ. I don't think you're asking if it can coexist as an injection zone or as a disposal zone.
Yeah, so you do have a well drilled 2006 into the San Andreas. And then from your testimony, you're saying that it produced some amount of oil. If we can bring that up so you can see the entire statement, page 3 of the direct testimony of Mr. William West.
Yeah, correct. Those are those ones that are very top of the structure. And they would have to.
Can you go down? Yeah, right there. The highlighted red. Mm-hmm.
And if you in my PowerPoint slides, it had the cross section, and those are those 2 very top wells. I don't know if you remember that, to where those are the peaks. So you would anticipate that being the residual part of the transition zone that would be left as being in the top of the structure where you have closure, right? So you'd have the ROZ coming down and things, and you're able to have a little bit higher saturations, and they tested oil from there. So he's telling you where you broke over from that ROZ to that transition just a little bit. Now, they weren't great wells, but it did, confirm that you do have hydrocarbons there that are able to flow.
Yeah, so what I was trying to understand here is that, let's say this well was completed in the San Andreas, irrespective of the location. It was completed in the San Andreas.
Yes, sir.
Tested about 3 barrels of oil.
Yes, sir.
And even at that time, there has been some amount of water injection into the San Andreas. Is that a fair statement?
Some. I mean, if we went back on that cumulative as of 2006, and especially the cumulative part of it, is the St. Andrews was pretty drawn down. So I think that injection you'd be filling up. You wouldn't necessarily be pushing anything in the area of where because this is high on structure right at the peak.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't anticipate you have flushed that off at that point in time. Now, I would be worried about it now a little bit more. I mean, the higher structure right now is still kind of, I'd say, a little bit safer because there really hasn't been as much disposal up there as you get off to the flank. I mean, that's where all the permits kind of surround this area.
So let me put that question in another context. Can CO2 EOR to produce the ROZ coexist with water injection, commercial water injection in the San Andres?
No.
Can you explain that?
So if you got commercial injection going into the St. Andrews, you're raising the reservoir pressure of it by, flooding it out. And then I don't know where you would put commercial injection in St. Andrews could happen, if you went a couple miles down dip, right? And you got off structure long enough. So that would be a choice if you could get, 2 miles away from the structure and then it's down dip, then it could coexist there. But you could not develop the ROZ at the same time as it going into the structure of where you're going to develop the ROZ.
So you're saying that at least it has to be 2 miles away from the structure to even consider a coexistence of it. Okay.
Yes, you need some distance, right? So then that you have that area that you could pump those volumes in and things, and you're far enough out that the pressure is going to be a minimal impact, or maybe you're just, pushing a little bit of, bottom water up. And
was there any analysis done to come up with the 2 miles? Because Mr. Wheeler also talked about it.
Yes. And the 2 miles is, that's we talked 5 in all of it, but, at least a minimum of, 2 miles, I think is a reasonable distance that you could get away. I mean, it's a large reservoir.
Okay. So I'm going back now, I'm switching back to your exhibits. And I don't know if you have it in front of you, but on I-6, you made a comment there that it caught my eye. I-6, you made a comment there that caught my eye. Yeah, right there. You're saying NMOCD recognized Greenberg and San Andres as one oil producing zone. Can you comment on that?
Is recognized as it's part of the unit, right? So, I mean, it's, which part of the comment do you?
Yes. Is there an evidence that NMOCD is saying the San Andres is oil bearing zone, oil bearing reservoir?
I think definitely around the area to the north, to the south, it's definitely an oil bearing zone, right? And it's an oil bearing zone in here, and it was part as the MOCD of recognizing it as this is part of the unit that to produce the oil out of here. And I think there's some comments in the unit agreement, to be able to provide for all those recoveries of the hydrocarbons.
So when you make that statement, you are referring to, let's say, analogous fields, not necessarily the EMSU, but other areas where the San Andres is producing oil.
Yes, I mean, recognizing it as the unit, but then also that it's in the area, definitely the St. Andrews is recognized as an oil producing zone. The unit just directly to the north produces out of the St. Andrews, right? The one that adjoins the MSUB, North Monument Field. And then you've got ones directly to the, east that we showed there that, produces oil out of it. So it's a well-recognized, I mean, what I think in the Permian Basin before the last boom, it was the number 2 reservoir producer out of the Permian Basin. So it's a prolific and well-recognized oil producing zone.
Okay. So then definitely there is an existence of oil samples, or let's say some oil analysis that has been done in the Permian Basin for the San Andres oil that you are aware of?
Yes, I'm sure there's lots of ones, and one that we pulled on a lot was from the Seminole field,
From the Seminole field.
right? To help to put together our estimates for the, what CO2 would do here, because it's a great field, as Mr. Metzler talked about, and things that, I think as Chevron, it's put a lot of work into gathering, data of different cores and different things. And it's a highly successful CO2 flood.
So let's talk about the pressures a little bit. So if we can go to exhibit I4. And, and I like this slide so much. But let's talk about it. So you are using the pressure profile to prove that there is a reduction in the original pressure in the San Andres, that there has been some reduction of about 282 PSI reduction, meaning there has been some depletion from that. Okay. So my question to you is that the first one is, what is the source of the pressure?
These are RFT pressure. So the source of the pressure of kind of you curve to the left coming down are RFT pressures in the 211. The source of the pressure over to the right is where we took the initial pressure from 1939 and extrapolated down on that 0.386, which is actually ended up being confirmed with the piece that bottom hole pressure from 1959, 1960, right? It lined up. So that line over to the right seems to be a pretty decent original pressure. And then you took the RFTs, which I'm sure you're familiar with RFT. I don't know if everyone else in here, but basically when you're drilling, you're, putting a cupping mechanism basically against the reservoir. You're vacating that space and, it's sealing up against the rock, and you're taking that pressure in that individual space because you've got heavier fluid around you, and you record those pressures. And so these are the pressure points that were taken in 1986.
So within the San Andres, so this one was taken in 1986. Were there any other pressure taken in the San Andres that you are aware of?
No, unfortunately not.
Now, you assumed a hydrostatic pressure in the San Andres, 0.433 or 46. You made that clear in there. As the gradient to calculate your initial pressure, that should have been in the San Andres.
The 0.386 is what we used. And so this is the corrected one. Remember, we had the positive 250 to the negative 250. This is the one with the negative 250, which is the accurate and correct. And that's the 0.386 gradient. The other one was like the 0.43 or 2. I can't remember exactly.
Okay. Now, why did you utilize the 0.386 though?
Because that's where the pressure was taken at that point. And you would assume that, the reservoir up and down, maybe it was a slightly naturally underpressured reservoir, right? And so, because because that's what it would be, right? Because it's a little bit under a water gradient. And so not to, swap it to a waiter. I mean, if we swapped it to a full water gradient from that negative 250 measuring point and come down, it would be a much higher that we would be trying to say in the San Andreas. And you could have made that point and made it look like more, depletion, but we, thought that was a conservative value, is to take the 386. And then luckily, I mean, which is kind of a cool, nice thing, is the, pressure point from 1959 that was taken down in San Andreas almost lines up exactly with this estimate that was brought into evidence yesterday.
So based on the back and forth cross, you're saying that it was established that in 1955, the pressure gradient was very close to what you use in your, let's say, initial calculation for the San Andreas.
Yes, sir. In 1959, that pressure point there or whatnot. I mean, it's nice that it lined up and there wasn't a, that's kind of before there was really SWD injection in there. So it didn't, it's nice that the points line up actually.
Yeah. When I saw this, I thought probably the previous slide where I thought that you were assuming that is a normal fracture regime. So I thought I was going to ask, okay, what about if it was under pressure, right? Mm-hmm. But it sounds like you took a conservative approach. Mm-hmm. Okay, I appreciate that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Wow. Now, is there any other mechanism, aside withdrawal, or let's say influx of the water from the San Andreas into the Greenberg, that could have caused the reduction in the pressure? Is there any reservoir engineering mechanism that could have caused that?
Well, let's think through this, right? The only thing that would be is that you have to have some removal of fluids, right? So if we're, in this point in 1986, and before that, especially inside of where the MSU is, there really hasn't been any withdrawal from the San Andreas, because the primary stuff, the good stuff was always up in the Grayburg, right? And that was, where everyone was focused and staying in. So there was no production. We don't know of any known production down below, no withdrawals for water. But there was a reduction in pressure from the San Andreas. And so it had to be produced, right? Somewhere. Work through it with me. Can't think of any other spot that it could be coming up from outside of production that happened in the area. So your production in the area that was closest reservoir would be the Grayburg.
Then let me ask you, so how do you assess the boundary condition for the San Andreas in the EMSU?
Which boundary are you talking about?
The external boundary. Is it closed, or is it open? Is it semi-closed?
I have to refer to my geologist on there and the pieces of it. I'm unsure. I don't know if you have enough, so if you, whenever, let's talk the Grayburg real quick, and then we'll just have to talk down through the San Andreas. But the Grayburg, it's, you've got a structure, right, a little bit to the top, and then to the east, it stratigraphically kind of pinches out. The reservoir rock deteriorates, and that kind of sets it. And then you're not really bound back to the west, right? We're up on the Central Basin platform here. And so we're sitting off that shelf, and then all of a sudden, like, you go off the western bounds of the where the MSU is, you really drop off into the Delaware Basin, right? Is what's happening, right? I mean, you drop like 3,000 foot, if don't quote me on that, if I remember right, that you drop steeply and then you get into the Delaware Basin. And so you're really unbounded on the southern side of, of the reservoir for sure. Now, I don't know whenever you take that St. Andrews exactly when you go to the east, because you don't really have enough penetration deep enough to say whether you got the same strat, pinch out happening. It's hard to say if you're in communication. I just don't have that. I just don't have enough data. We could think through different ideas and go like, hey, if it happened in the Grayburg, these are all, at the same time, maybe it's similar, maybe it's not, but I can't tell you that I have evidence of one way or another to what that boundary condition is to the east.
Okay, I'm curious to see what Larry Lake will talk about, whether, if there's any other way to explain why pressure will reduce, to this magnitude, and even you are conservative, because I thought you were probably using normal pressure. You even use under pressure,
Yes, sir.
So I'm looking forward to see what Goodnight will say about that. Okay. You showed the injection profile throughout the years, and then you also match that to, let's say, when Goodnight, if we allow Goodnight to continue on injection.
Yes, that cumulative plot. There it is.
Yeah, right there. Right there.
Down one.
Yeah, right there. Now, I want to ask you, if you look at the others, right, which is about 25,000 barrel of water per day injection going on there. At the bottom, you see, let's say 2023, 2025, the average, you can see probably let's say somehow around 25,000.
For which time period?
So I'm looking at the others right now, the plot on the figure on the screen. I'm looking at the blue.
So the blue is from everyone else.
Exactly.
The orange would be the Goodnight.
Yeah. So what if during the transition period, assuming the commission says that, okay, Empire, you can go ahead and do, your characterization work to really prove that the ROZ is recoverable. Do you believe that the commission can at least, cut Goodnight's injection to about 25,000? And would that significantly impact your operations?
Yeah, I think definitely in the areas of where it's, happening, especially if it's concentrated, it would. Now, from, as far as our stance, from upper management or whatever to proceed forth, and he's ready to do that. Mr. Molochek, I mean, before I started with the company, which is before I knew about any of this stuff, in my interviews with him, he talked about this project. I mean, he's firmly believed into it. This is the big project the company firmly believes in, and he wants to proceed with it. Now, we'd have to talk through terms and different pieces of it is, but he doesn't want any injection going in within 2-mile boundary of the MSU to proceed because, I mean, this guy goes big. I mean, he's, drilled the largest, the #1 and #2 Guinness Book of World Record gas finds, in the world. And he doesn't know any other way to go big. And so whenever you go to do something out here, he wants to lay the pipeline. He wants to, go and do the injection. He doesn't want to do a huff and puff. He doesn't want to do the different things. He wants to produce the minerals out here. And so I wouldn't want to risk, the reservoir and the damage of a high injection rate into it. Now, maybe we could talk something that the small amounts of historical, that was that predated everything. But I just letting you know where his stance is right now is he wants that 2 mile buffer around there and everything to be shut down to be able to proceed. And he's ready to.
Yeah, so, when Commission Counsel was going back and forth with Mr. Wheeler, he talked about, should the commission consider that the permit that was granted Goodnight was by the government, in our analysis. So what I'm asking you is, during the pilot project time, to transition Goodnight out of the EMSU, at least can the commission consider extreme reduction in injection volumes whilst they more or less move 2 miles away, because it's also extensive investment that is in there. So my question is, how much compromise is Empire going to make here?
So what I would ask there is that if we're having injection in there, is that creating waste and flooding out a resource, and protecting that? We're going to develop it and things, but if there's injection going on every day, we're wasting and flooding out hydrocarbon resource.
So then why is Empire's not positioned for the commission to strike all injection wells in the San Andreas, in the EMSU?
It is.
Including your well?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that part of the case here?
I more than happily will give it back to you.
Okay.
That's not a problem. We're not even injecting in it, right?
Okay. So there's no other entity injecting into the EMSU aside Goodnight and probably Empire on a smaller note.
It's the parties that's all mentioned here. I can't remember exactly where Rice and Permian's, wells are, but they're right there on the boundary of it. There's some inside,
So Mr. Wheeler touched on this a little bit. So has there been a discussion with these parties to move 2 miles away from, let's say, the EMSU that you are aware of?
I have to say I haven't been part of any of those discussions or whatnot. I know that the lawyers talked or whatnot. I know that there was conversations and discussions to have those discussions. I wasn't part of them, so I can't speak to them.
So let's go to the next slide where we're showing the withdrawal over time. Yeah, right there. So can you tell the commission on the red session, how much pressure are we building up? At least you can reference to Dr. Backwater's testimony and it should be okay.
I think, that point, and I don't remember his exact testimony, but, he showed in some of that testimony of that pressure going up once you hit that point. And ironically, I did this totally independent, and I think this is an oversimplistic reservoir model, but with that high injection rate and that going up that quick, you're going to, especially definitely the closer you are to the well bores, are going to have a higher pressure. And naturally that that's going to have it's going to go out radial in some means to pressure, but it's hard to speak to the exact increase of pressure. I would have to probably defer to Mr. Buckwater's model as being, the best anticipation that we could of what the pressure would be going forward.
I've always had some issues or concern about how much water that needs to be withdrawn before even the ROZ production can become commercial. Looking at this profile, do you see that as a concern too?
So I think to make the project proper, I think we need to flood out some of the top zones in zone 1 and zone 2. I think it's some of the problems with the water flood and things, and to build that barrier to kind of keep your CO2 down below and things. Zone 3, zone 4s, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the Grayburg is, also is a big chunk that we need to recover with CO2. And you kind of have that a little bit more of a perm barrier there anyway. So a good place to take that water out when you withdraw it is to put it in to fill up those zones 1 and 2.
Okay, so that brings up another question. So you're saying that you're going to withdraw the water from the San Andres and put it in some layers in the Greenberg.
Yes, sir.
Will that not also cost waste to the potential recoverable oil that will be in there?
I mean, you're still going to, produce. I mean, so a lot of, zone 1 and zone 2, you've got a lot out already. Now it's hard to really get those were the sweets, those had the most permeability and, the biggest, largest primary. Now they've created issues, and Love's paper talks about it in different things because of those super high permeability streaks that, it's hard to get into the smaller pore throats and the places to get the water flood. Now you could CO2 it also, but it's got such large, high permeability and different things that probably your recovery might not be as good in those zones. And right now you're a 99+% water cut on everything. So you strip things out pretty good. And so you wouldn't waste it, right? I mean, the water that's, at least traditionally that was in the St. Andrews was, used for the water flood up above. So I wouldn't anticipate any more than what's historically been done, as long as it's the original water, to put it back up in the water flood. It's not going to create waste. Worst case, at some point in time later in the future, you might preserve it, is that you could take that water back out and dewater it, maybe switch your CO2 up and change in different zones.
So does Empire do have a well thought out plan for the execution of the CO2 project?
We've had a lot of discussions. Now we've had to divert a lot to work on this project. I mean, we're a small company now. Whenever this happened, literally I hired on like 11 employees. Whenever I came on there June 1, okay, and before that, Mr. Molachek and things talked about this project, wanted to do this project. And then, we were trying to kick off a drilling project in North Dakota, a bunch of different things. We make a trip out to New Mexico to go see the asset, and we see the big tanks or whatever. And he was like, oh my gosh. And so next thing you know, in the month of August, and we had all this paperwork due in September, I hired like over 11 employees. Okay. Because we're like, this is like the big plans of the company is to develop. It's to go hand in hand with the state of New Mexico, put together this big, large CO2 flood, recover these resources because he sees it as one of the largest ones in the world. Let's partner up. Let's do this. And that's what his great plan is. And so that's why he's like, you know what? No matter what, we got to speed this up and to, get this stopped, whatever it takes, because, he wants to do this. This is a big project for the state of New Mexico.
Thank you for that. So has the current injection in the San Andreas in any way impacted your water flood in the Greenberg?
It's a big water flood. It comes back in. So kind of the way the whole water flows, you end up you've got 2 big 10,000 barrel tanks of water where the produced water comes into, and then it goes into another set of 2. And so you're dependent on a lot of well tests. And so you can, we showed some things. I do think there's the start of indications of the water salinities going up. While you got to look over the right time period of things, we have seen some lowering of, production. in it. So, but it's such a massive thing that by the time you really see, steep, sharp declines, it's over. The damage has already been done. But I do think that the changes of the water chemistry is a good indication, especially when that's right in the immediate area. I do believe that, when you do see indications of, oil production falling off from the whole entire unit, that it's having an effect. And, it gets scary whenever you have such a difference in water chemistry between the two fluids, that it's going to happen in the reservoir way before it shows up to the wellbore.
Yesterday during the cross, Mr. Rankin showed you the oil production profile for the Greenberg. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And I don't know if we can bring that up, because I want to compare that to the table that you provided to the commission, the amount of oil and then the amount of injection and then the amount of water that has been injected.
Yes, sir.
I want that slide to really talk about, to use that for us to talk about the impact of the injection on the water flood. So I don't know if we can see the production profile. I want you to look at that production profile and explain to the commission if this is not a typical primary, secondary type of profile you will see in an actual reservoir. And if you remember that figure, probably you can speak to that.
I remember there's two of them, and I don't know if you're talking about the complete historical one or you're talking about the one that was more like the last year or two.
No, the complete
one.
The complete one.
I'll let her pull it up. I can speak to it. It was what I would anticipate, right? I would anticipate, so you're, low on production in oil, right? And then you start the injection and then you get the push and you come way up, right? Now, as you continue to work the water flood and things, you expect that after you get that initial breakthrough, that your water cutter will go up and things and your oil production will start to taper down, right? But with that, though, you're still getting a pretty good sweep of the water flood, right? It's giving you good barrels. Right, here you go. Mm-hmm. So as you turn on the water flood in 87, 89, right, you get that good push and you come up, and then there's probably, let's be honest, this doesn't show it, but you're drilling wells and things, right? And things of it is you're actively developing, it, which, you got the drop off before that because they probably did conversions. Let's assume, right? That's probably where the barrels came off. And so then you go up. And then you start coming down a general slide. I mean, I think, 01, 02, or 03 in that area, if I had to guess, that little bump there was either they did some, conformance work. I think, if I remember from Mr. Lindsay, they did some conformance work. And I think that's maybe, around the context of some of the love paper and things. I can't remember the exact years, but you did some work, it looks like, right? And you did some improvements and then you came off. And it looks like again in, 06, 07, I'm guessing we did some work there. Oh, actually, that's when XTO bought it, right? Roughly in that time frame. I think it was 2004, 2006. Don't hold me to it, but it's in that time frame. So, and if I remember correctly, there's a few wells that were drilled. So, okay, you flattened off again because there's a few wells drilled, right? And then you're, continuing down what I would say is, your later, near later life, water flood. And it's a fairly consistent turn. And then it kind of, flattens out a little bit more toward the end, but that's kind of because you haven't really done a whole lot of conformance work. Right. And so those barrels and how many pour volumes that you've passed by there and things, you're not really grabbing a whole lot of new barrels. But you're not losing a bunch because you're just, really skimming a lot of oil off the water. So you flatten out more at the later part of the flood. And you're flat there unless you do conformance work, you do something to pick it back up. And, from, probably the last conformance work really in this flood was done more around 2000, 2001, 2, early on there. The XTO was really, a drilling thing. I know that they did 1 or 2 horizontals, that they laid down, that they sidetracked out of the wells. So I think that's what that flattening is. But there just hasn't been a lot of work done to make an improvement. So you just on that slide, and then naturally you get that hyperbolic, and it kind of flattens out a little bit more.
Yeah, so we are engineers, right? So as you look at this, I mean, is it easy to say that there is some kind of excessive water coming from some amount of water coming from the San Andres to really impact oil production in the Greenberg? Just looking at the production history.
Oh, on this scale, I mean, it's hard to say, right? I mean, if you look way back in history, you knew that there was water coming there from the excessive production, historical production before the flood. And so I think could be a safe assumption that probably whatever those mechanisms were that, created that water early, before flooding or any of that stuff, that they're probably still open. And those avenues are still connecting the St. Andrews into the Grayburg. Now, any extra water that is not helping your flood or anything is going to be impactful, right? It costs more chemicals, it costs more electricity on pumps, everything to move it all around. So you're cycling everything. Now, to quantify the volume part of it, that's really hard to say how much water is coming up.
So you're saying that, assuming we are not able to establish that there is any impact of the injection going in the San Andres on the Greenberg, you are saying that you do have water supply wells that might be contaminated and still more or less cause the corrosion problems in the Greenberg.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we definitely have that part of that, which is a really direct, you're pulling water out of there and putting it in. No matter what, you're affecting that chemistry. And the other commissioner here was talking about if you get chemically treated or whatever, and especially when you talk barium and strontium, you really wouldn't want to put those chemicals into the formation because you're going to cause damage. A lot of those chemicals to treat and to stop those, forever scales, I kind of would call barium sulfate and strontium sulfate, because it just, unless you do mechanical means, you can treat the well bore, but you can't really treat the reservoir to stop those.
So I think we are agreeing that it's so difficult to really tell just looking at the production profile if there is any adverse effect, from the water from the San Andreas. But we've talked about the corrosion too. Can we go to the slide where you have the production and then the injection in a table form? Yeah, that was your testimony.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. That had the, I think the 9 months.
Yes, yes, in a table form. And,
is it in the actual testimony or is it an exhibit? Do you know?
it should be a table.
Yeah, I can't
with the Mr. West, the one I'm talking about.
I know which one you're talking about, but I can't
okay,
where it's located in all these documents.
Yeah, right on page
there it is.
It should be I-18.
Yes,
so let's go down. It should be a table, so page 106 of 118. Yeah, right there. And same on this one too, from engineering point of view, you are injecting about, let's say close to about 70,000 barrels a day. And we are more or less producing around that same amount. So in terms of material balance, it's not easy to say that there's any foreign water coming into my reservoir.
Well, as we established, it's hard to say what has been coming in, right? You can't tell where it's coming. And this is where we start to blend in the piece of, reservoir and production a little bit, because reservoir material, it's tough, right? I mean, that's big volumes, different things. And, as engineers, we, especially when you start doing production, is like you start to go like, is there a trend starting? Because things happen slower in the production world, I guess you would say, right? And so you start to just try to, am I seeing a drop off or not? Or am I seeing anything else, happening? Now, there's no doubt that through all this, you've got well work going on and different things. You might have an injector go down and MIT, you got to take care of them back up. So that may change your injection up and down. You can have the same way on the, oil produced too, right? There's a lot of factors going on. And so we can talk to and we could discuss going like, maybe there's something going on right now, right? It takes, only history proves the truth, right? It's always tough to predict, but I think you see a trend, and we didn't change any operations of the field outside of your normal operations, but you're trending, and it's hard to say where the water's coming from. I mean, you could kind of even look at which is kind of odd, right? If we just looked at June and July, for whatever reason it swapped there, we've got more water produced and less water injected versus the first 2 months. If we looked up in November, December, they're almost flip-flop. So you could start to say like, we're producing, we're not injecting that much and we're getting more volumes out of water. If we just looked at the water, and I hadn't really, to be honest with you, even looked at that until us, having this engineering discussion to try to work through the data. So yeah, I mean, it's
but the volumes are fairly close to each other because, let's say you could have made a stronger case here, assuming you are injecting 70,000 and producing 100,000. I mean, that is a clear evidence that there is some kind of some foreign water coming into my reservoir. But in this one, it's just so pairing up, down. So looking at this, will you agree with me that it's so difficult, to establish that there is some strong communication between the San Andres and then the Greenberg?
So from this production piece of evidence, you can maybe be indications, right? I think the historical water production before the flood that was unexplainable is pretty hard evidence that you had communication, and then it's documented in, different documents that you had that part. Now, how many barrels are coming from which way right now? I don't know, right?
But, so, in Dr. Backwater's modeling, he did not really check he just perforated everything. So, if you look at even where that water, that higher production that we're showing, I mean, has it been established, in the hearing that we perforated the oil zone, but we're still producing significant amount of water? I don't think it has been established to the commission on the perforations of these higher volume water wells, to really lay that strong case that maybe XTO or the operator then did not probably perforate into the water zone in the Greenberg.
If you go high up on structure, so you're where Mr. Lindsay's documented is about a negative 540 subsea water contact in the Grayberg. So I can't quite get that water contact to the top of the structure of where those high waters are. I mean, you could cone up, you could do different things, but all indications is that, the down dip wells that are completed now, yes, some are in the high zone, some in the low zones, whichever way, they didn't see that large amount of water. So if my contact is lower down here, it's really hard, especially early on, for the flood to get those high volumes of water up at the top of the structure.
So your justification is that the oil water contact was well known
Mhm.
in the Greenberg, so there's no way they will path into the water zone. Is that your testimony?
Yes, so there's two different time frames of, they originally, had a water contact in the 350s, a negative 350. And then, after, more time and history and, wells that go down or whatever, then, and it's well documented in his PhD, Dr. Lindsay, he moved it down to a negative 540 because you just didn't have deep enough wells to establish that. And so your water leg's a long ways away. And if we're talking let's say that we're talking in the 1986, before 86, 87 time frame, right? 81's whenever a lot of those plots are made of the water cumes. It's, without looking at every individual, it's hard to get that water, that high rates of water there, unless it's coming from another reservoir.
Let's talk a little bit about the CO2 and I'll wrap it up so we can continue. And I do appreciate the discussion. This has been really, really great and enlightening too. Now let's talk about the CO2. So the 1,003 PSI as the MMP, you're saying that that is analogous to the Seminole field?
Yes, from that Seminole paper.
Yeah. Do you believe that your reservoir, the EMSU now, is analogous to the Seminole field?
I believe it's a good analogy right now for close to being the same reservoir, similar, you're in that 30 to 35 API gravity oil, about the similar type temperatures, we're only 90, 100 degrees. It's about the same depth. So I believe it's, is what we can do in the industry. It's a good analogy is what we can get.
But I thought from all the testimony that we've listened, your EMSC unit is now going to be it's just unique because of the high volumes of water that has been injected in there. Does that impact the MMP in any way?
Let's think. I mean, you're the expert more in the CO2 than what I am, right? And you're the reservoir expert. So let's talk this through, right? So, the pressure is going to be the pressure in the reservoir. And right now we're in that 13 to 1,500 pounds of pressure, right? And then the oil is going to be the oil. The characteristics of that's probably not going to change. So if it's contained in there, that 1,300, 1,500, I mean, I think that's reasonable assumption that you're going to be somewhere in that range.
Okay, a reasonable assumption in that range. Okay. Now, so you use the Kinder Morgan CO2 screening tool for your economic analysis.
Yes, sir.
Does that have a ROZ piece in there?
So it's an economic model,
Yeah.
right? And so you're moving volumes of CO2 through, which is displacing, water, and it's displacing, oil, and then you're just kind of a mass balance of moving it in, moving it out. So it's kind of irrelevant if it's, the way the model is trying, if it's a CO2 flood main pay or if it's an ROZ, I don't think it impacts the model.
Yeah, but in that Kinder Morgan CO2 screen tool, I do believe that your EMSU system is a little bit unique right now. I mean, so in that economic model, did you include the amount of water that needs to be withdrawn from the San Andreas to even make CO2 flood effective in the economics?
It has the water piece in it, yes, of where you're removing it. The water usage you're removing into it. And well, since we've got, the flood going and everything else, and we could put it in 1 and 2, you've got the pumps there and everything to handle the water that you could take and you could put it up in there. I mean, it is definitely unique, and it is unique and nice that we have this large Grayberg, as part of the reservoir and things where you have these options and you can kind of vertically and horizontally develop these reservoirs at the same time. And you can use the existing infrastructure and the existing wells and things to help improve economics.
So definitely that portion was still part of your economic analysis.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. And then, so based on your testimony, you're also saying that the changes in the chlorides more or less also confirm the impacts of the water coming into the Greenberg. Is that your testimony?
Yeah, so it gives a strong indication that something's happening.
Okay. So on your exhibit slide, let's go to slide 25. You showed the injections that has gone on, I think 25, slide 25. Yeah. Even the upper one should be okay. I should be able to use the upper one. I should be able to use the one that we referred to earlier on. So if you can go down, the one that was showing the injection profile of Goodnight's injection. Yeah, right there. So this one, I do have one quick question here. Has any of these wells violated their permits, their current permits?
I believe, if I remember correctly, there were some points in time that they had some peak rates that went over the permitted volumes.
Okay.
I think it's documented in there, but I can't, remember discussions and talk of that. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head.
Okay, so let's go to exhibit I-19. So in I-19 and onwards, 20, 21, 22, you're describing, let's say, if we permit the wells, and then even if we allow the current wells to continue, you are establishing the impact of the pressure buildup that will happen, let's say within the EMSU, more or less impacting your ROZ. I just want to understand more on the assumptions that was utilized here. I know you talked about withdrawal 1:1, but if you can also include the boundary situation here, where is that water that is displacing going?
It's a good question, right? I mean, down dip, it seems like you fall off into the Delaware Basin of what that boundary is. Honestly, I don't know the geology completely of what what would be your northeastern boundary on this reservoir. Now, it's very similar as you go, from the northwest to the southeast, we see the, continuous reservoir from the MSUB all the way down to the AGU. So I don't think you're bound in those directions. I don't know I really don't understand completely what that boundary is heading back to the east.
But it's a good assumption from your perspective that at least 1:1 can still establish what you are looking for here.
You repeat that? I don't understood it.
I'm saying that the assumption of 1:1 withdrawal and then injection is a good assumption, to establish the impact, that you are showing on these couple of exhibits to the commission.
Are you saying from the, where you push one barrel pushes one barrel?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now, one concern that I also had on the exhibit that you showed, the higher water production for some of the wells. One question that I had there was, did you also check the water cut of the wells? Yeah, on the slide. Did you check the water cut of these wells to see? Probably you are withdrawing more oil
You want to go ahead and pull up the slide here that has the oil on that? So we did look, I don't have, to answer your question, I have a slide for you.
Okay. You
Because-
prepare for that, huh? Okay. Okay.
Now, this is cumulative volumes, of oil and water produced, and you can see you'll see that you'll be able to infer what the cut is.
Okay.
Good to have a good tech person in the room. Okay. So here's, at that point in time, prior to, 1986, this is the same thing, except we're putting oil on there. So total volumes produced out of the wells. And, from the pies, you can infer what the water cut was.
Okay, so definitely those big ones with higher water, you can still see that in the bubble maps. Okay.
So you see how those ones right up at the top of the structure get to be really hard to explain with how good of oil cut wells you had in between there. Now, we do believe that you did have some effect from the goat seep on some of those ones to the, southwestern corner. I mean, that's kind of documented.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Is this one in evidence?
I can't move to put it in there, but
We were going to move to put this into evidence with Mr. West's redirect because we knew this issue was raised yesterday. But I can move it into evidence now if you would.
Okay,
Like-
what exhibit number is it?
It would be Empire Exhibit N23, which is the continuation from Mr. West's last exhibit.
Mr. Rankin, any objection?
I haven't seen it, and I guess I just like to know what the data is, the source of the data, a little bit more about where it came from and the data.
it's from the historical NMOCD records, just the same as what the previous one was made of.
Yeah, I guess my question though is, I guess my understanding, Mr. Hearing Officer, that the OCD data goes back to 1994. So I presume this would be Empire's data. But my understanding is that prior to 1970, there was no per well data. So I'm wondering I'm just trying to understand how this was allocated in the years prior to 1970, because there was no per well data. And that's why Dr. Buckwalter didn't have allocated data prior to 1970. So I don't understand how Empire was able to allocate this much refinement to all these wells. I just don't understand that. I'm just I want to make sure I understand the basis for the bubble maps.
Okay, well, I'm going to assume that's an objection and it'll be admitted. Well, it'll be admitted over your objection, but I see Mr. Moander is chafing at the bit to say something.
Mr. Hearing Officer, a quick voir dire of the witness should resolve this so we can keep things moving.
That's fine.
Just a proposal to keep the football headed down the field.
That's a good suggestion. Mr. Rankin, you have a few questions for the witness on this exhibit.
Mr. West, did you yourself prepare this exhibit?
I had some of my staff prepare it because I was in here.
Do you understand what the source of the data is for this exhibit?
Yes, it's the historical records, the same thing that everything else has been, the blend between that's been provided to you. That was from the Gulf days, the Chevron days, and then, the NMOCD records.
Okay. Is it your understanding, are we losing connection? Have we lost connection, or is it just me that's hearing the beeping in the background? I think we've been disconnected.
I think this still looks on.
Can probably get in a Teams call or something.
Somebody's gonna call.
Sorry about that. Okay, so your understanding is that the source of the data here is a combination of data that was provided to Goodnight from Empire
Correct.
and OCD public data.
Correct.
Are you familiar with Dr. Buckwalter's database that he used to create his model?
I didn't, I'm familiar with, the whole database of it. I don't know exactly that data, this should be the same data that's in his database.
And Empire provided the database to Dr. Buckwalter, correct?
That is correct.
And is it your understanding that prior to 1970, Empire had a per well data production for the EMSU?
You're stressing my memory on it at the moment on it all, but it's exactly the way, because I get flipped between the different states of it. Historical records in New Mexico are really a lot per well. Gosh, I can't remember exactly on that. I mean, we provided you all the production. This is where this comes out of this production and, the per well basis. This could only be created on a per well basis.
That's right. That's my question, I guess, Mr. West, because my understanding is that Dr. Buckwalter prior to 1970 didn't have and you can pull up Dr. Buckwalter's model and you'll see that he didn't have a per well allocation. He has a cumulative allocation for water production because he didn't have a per well allocation. Do you agree?
I can't speak to his model off the top of my head on that.
I'd have to pull up Mr. Buckwalter's evidence to show that he doesn't have a per well. He's using a cumulative production of water and oil because he didn't have a per well production prior to 1970. I'd have to get back online to do that, to pull it up and share.
Well, I think it's beyond the scope of the voir dire that was suggested. He's explained the basis for the exhibit. So I'm assuming that you believe there's an inconsistency and that you probably oppose admission of the exhibit.
I do, Mr. Hearing Officer. It's a massive inconsistency because prior to 1970, there is no per well data. And this is entirely based on per well data. And I don't understand how it was created.
All right, goes to weight, not admissibility. It'll be admitted over Goodnight's objection. What is OCD's position?
OCD doesn't object to the exhibit.
Rice?
Yeah, without testimony of whoever created this and the data that went into it, I can't say that it's a fair representation of the evidence. So Rice and Permian are opposed to its admission. And I think without the data, it does go to the admissibility. We don't know whether this is a fair representation of the evidence underlying this data.
All right, thank you. Pilot?
Pilot will also object to the admission of this exhibit, Mr. Examiner.
Okay, thank you. Your positions are noted for the record. Dr. Ompoma.
So looking at this, did you analyze this information and collaborated with Dr. Buckwalter's work that he did?
Yeah. Yes. So the cumulative water, and he, had all this information to make his model. And that's where he put the breaks in to where the higher water production cut wells were. That's where he put those, vertical perm breaks into it.
I mean, why did Dr. Buckwater not talk to the commission about this at all to justify why he had to increase some of the cells to really match his model?
He didn't do quite as good a job of explaining his model as what I wished he would have.
Okay, thank you so much. I enjoyed the engineering discussions and thanks for being here. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Your mic isn't on, hearing officer.
All right, let's start that over again. Chairman Rosatos, I don't believe you've had the opportunity to ask questions of Mr. West. Do you have questions for this witness?
Mr. Examiner, my Teams link is showing that it was disconnected, but I don't know if that's just me.
I wasn't kicked off, Dana, but it just put me back on. I'm having to get back on. So maybe just take you a moment to do it.
Looks like everyone else is connected, so maybe it's just me for the moment.
I got
Okay, well, why don't we take our mid-morning break and we'll come back and see if we've resolved the technical issues with the chairman, and then it'll be redirect by Empire. Okay, thank you. back on the record. Ms. Tejas, can I get a thumbs up from you? All right. Mr. Rosatos, did you have anything you needed to add?
No, Mr. Hearing Officer, and my apologies. I had technical issues on my end. I have no questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then it's back full circle to Empire for redirect of Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Examiner. Mr. West, I realize we've heard a lot of testimony and questions, so I'll be jumping back and forth a little bit. Mr. Rankin asked you about your specific experience with CO2 projects. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
And does Empire have technical staff that have worked on CO2 projects?
Yes, ma'am. I have 3 engineers on staff with over, 30 years of industry experience that have worked on multiple CO2 projects.
Mr. Rankin asked you if the production test that you discussed on the MSU 660 and 658 wells were publicly available. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
And have you determined whether those tests were publicly available?
I believe it, from their 2019 testimony of Goodnights that they're applying in there that they knew there was oil production from the St. Andrews. So I'd assume that was from those tests.
And this is referenced in your rebuttal exhibit N10, is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
Okay. And just actually before we took our break, we were discussing your exhibit that I'm showing here. And can you, and this will be marked, I understand, and has been admitted, but can you explain a little bit about where the data came from that was used to prepare this exhibit?
Yes. And so up to 1971 in the technical papers, it had all the cumes per well of oil and water. And then the 1986, unitization, or 86, 87, whatever the dates was, it had per well data in there. So you had historical that was in that you get from IHS and things from 1970 and beyond before. And this is the same stuff that was in Mr. Buckwalter's. And then the bridge was up to the technical committee report. And then you've had full reports since then.
Thank you. And does Dr. Lindsay's dissertation also discuss communication between the St. Andrews and the Grayburg?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm going to pull up your rebuttal exhibit N19. Sorry. And is this a figure and information from Dr. Lindsay's dissertation?
Yes, ma'am. That's from his PhD.
Okay. And let me pull up the actual page as well from the dissertation. Is that what I've pulled up here?
Yes, ma'am. That's the diagram over to the left of the AGU. And it's showing how in this system going there that you have these sections of bottom water where he clearly indicated on this map. And then you've got that little southwest edge water that, comes into the reservoir. And you could see, as his description there on page 1004, said these plumes are vertically oriented in the upper St. Andrews Formation, bottom water only, affected in small areas of the units. In most cases, only affected one well, though mapped as if the bottom water was affecting a larger area. Similarly, these vertical oriented plumes of upper St. Andrews Formation bottom water were also encountered in individual wells further in the north MSU unit and the MSU B unit. So it's something that's, depictive of, historical data that you had these plumes all the way up and down the structure.
And Mr. Examiner, I'd like to move the admission of this page. We have the figure and some of the language that I had referenced in Mr. West's rebuttal exhibit that's in evidence already, but I thought it would be helpful for the commission to have this actual language from the dissertation on the right. So I would move the admission of this exhibit as Empire Exhibit N24.
Any objection from Goodnight
No objection. No objection.
and OCD?
No objection.
Rice,
No objection.
Pilot.
No objection.
Okay, thank you. It'll be admitted.
Thank you. And Mr. West, Mr. Rankin asked you a number of questions about the 1996 Chevron paper and its statement that St. Andrews water was mixing with Grayburg water in the wellbores. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
And if water is mixing in the wellbores, where would it come from?
And kind of with my discussion with the doctor, if, you got a conventional well bore and say, because if it's open hole, it would have to have been drilled down into. So let's talk conventionally. You got the shoe track. So you got 100 to 200 foot of cement in the bottom of the well with your float collars and your plugs, right? Because that's where you pump the cement down and come back up the side. So that's the bottom of the well bore is about as plugged as it's going to get. It's pure pipe and things. And so there's no real entries directly from the bottom. So it has to come up somewhere inside, mix into the reservoir, and enter through the perfs. So it would have to, have mixed into one of the lower zones of the zone 5 or zone 6 of the Grayburg, and then enter the wellbore. And then as they were talking production-wise, that it was in the wellbore mixing.
Mr. Rankin asked you a number of questions about the Love paper, which was Goodnight Cross Exhibit 1. And if the water in the Grayburg was coming from the goat seep, would you expect to see, would there be a barium sulfate problem?
The goat seep does not have, quantities of salt. It's not a sulfate-rich environment, so there's no sulfate to make the barium sulfate. So no, the goat seep water would not precipitate out barium sulfate.
So does that indicate to you that the water is not coming, that you're seeing is not coming from the goat seep?
That is correct.
And Mr. Rankin asked you questions about your slide number 11, which let me get there. And this was Dr. Buckwalter's exhibit M3. And specifically, he'd asked whether the report excerpts that are shown here addressed the MSU. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And is the excerpt here from the report on the AGU?
Yes, ma'am.
And where is the AGU located?
The AGU is just to the southeast of the MSU unit.
And is it part of the same structure as the MSU?
Yes, you would, it's considered the same structure, and you can call that the kind of the Unionist Monument, field. It's all part of that same structure.
Okay, and I'm going to pull up, this is the actual AGU technical committee report that's referenced in your slide. You can see here the cover page. Let me get here to the page I want to ask you about. Okay, so I am looking at page 8 of the technical committee report for the AGU. And with respect to water migration, can you please tell us what this is stating?
Yes, as it states there, a portion of the water production is probably attributed to communications of zones 4 and 5 of the lower Grayburg with the St. Andrews aquifers. And then it goes into, although synclastic, some geology terms between each zone is generally prevent vertical communication in some localized areas of the field. They do not act as permeable barriers. When the barriers break down in the lower Grayburg members, the prolific St. Andrews aquifer can influx into the oil productive horizons, resulting in large volumes of water production.
And again, is the Arrowhead Grayberg unit part of the UNIS monument structure?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Mr. Examiner, I'd like to move the admission of this exhibit as Empire Exhibit N25 for purposes of completion, since we had this excerpt in Mr. West testimony, and then Mr. Rankin questioned him about that.
Any objection from Goodnight?
No, I just have a question. I'm trying to understand. Was this was part of the 1983 technical committee report? Was that not all submitted, Mr. Hearing Officer? I believe it would have been all submitted, but I'm not. Oh, it's from the Arrowhead Grayberg unit. I see.
Right.
Okay. Got it. No objection.
All right, OCD,
No objection.
Rice,
No objection.
Pilot.
No objection.
All right, it'll be admitted.
Thank you. And let me just switch around here. Mr. Rankin asked you a number of questions about the 1996 Chevron paper and whether it discusses water migrating from the San Andres into the Grayberg. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let me pull up a slide here on the Chevron paper. That's not what I want to show you, so just a second. Okay, here we go. Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, here, let me make it bigger. Okay. And can you explain what this slide is showing?
Again, this is talking about the mixing of the fluids from the sulfate-rich San Andres water with the barium-rich Grayberg water and the precipitation of scale. And in there, as it's highlighted, you can see where it says, San Andres water was finding its way into the well bores of these wells and resulted in a barium sulfate scale and barite deposition problem.
Does that support your determination as well that water is migrating from the San Andres into the Grayberg?
Yes.
And I'd like to move the admission of this exhibit as Empire Exhibit N26, since it's summarizing, or it's including parts of the Chevron paper that Mr. Rankin asked Mr. West about.
I thought we'd seen this already before. Isn't this an exhibit already? Or this was something that you showed, wasn't it, Mr.?
I don't think this exact slide was shown.
Okay. Any objection from Goodnight?
No.
OCD,
No objection.
Rice,
No objection.
Pilot?
No objection.
Does it have an exhibit number?
It would be N26.
It'll be admitted.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, this is being a little bit finicky. It's probably me. It's probably not the technology, but I'm doing my best to switch back and forth here to a number of things. So thank you for your patience. Just get to what I want to show. Okay. Okay. And here I'm showing slide 17 from your presentation that there's been a fair amount of discussion about over the course of the hearing. And just to be clear, when did Goodnight start injecting?
As shown on there in 19 is where you've got the little small piece of orange. Come on.
And Mr. Rankin asked you questions about the time period dating back prior to January of 2012. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
And have you reviewed that data, and had you reviewed it before you prepared the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
And how does it compare in relation to Goodnight's injection shown on your slide?
It's a very similar trend back in the past, and it's reflective of the cumulative slide there that there wasn't these large volumes of injection going on in the reservoir for
And
disposal.
Mr. Examiner, because this slide has been discussed extensively, I think during the hearing, I would like to move it into evidence as well as Empire Exhibit N27.
Mr. Rankin?
My only concern with this exhibit is that it's a little misleading because it's a stack chart and it's not clear on the face of the exhibit that you have to subtract the blue volumes from the orange volumes to determine what Goodnight's volumes are. And that's my only concern with this exhibit. Otherwise, it's OCD data, it's public data, no other concerns with it.
Okay, and I think you asked those questions of the witness on cross anyway.
I did. Just based on that, with the record, I have no objections.
All right, thank you. OCD?
No objection. I think the issue of the nature of the chart has been discussed and the parties are apprised, as is the commission.
That's my memory as well. Rice?
No objection.
Pilot?
No objection.
It will be admitted.
Thank you. And Mr. West, Mr. Rankin asked you a number of questions about the pressure reading in the Rice well from 1959. Do you
Yes,
recall
ma'am.
those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I wanted to pull up your water balance slide, which was in your hearing presentation as slide number 18
Yes, ma'am.
here. And just to be clear, can you tell us what this slide shows with respect to the pressure in the reservoir in relation to the Rice well?
The Rice well was 1959, the beginning of this curve of where you started to have SWD injection in there, which lines up well with what the predictions was, from the initial negative 250 subsea pressure reading. So that's, historically lines up well. And then just, as discussed before in the chart, it just goes over the SWD injection, the withdrawal with the injection, and then, the slowing down of the withdrawal and the speeding up of the water disposal.
Mr. Examiner, this is another one that's been discussed extensively, so I'd like to move it into evidence as Empire Exhibit N28.
Mr. Rankin?
No objection.
OCD?
No objection.
Rice?
No objection.
Pilot?
No objection.
It will be admitted.
Thank you. Mr. West, regarding your economic models that you've discussed in your testimony, and Dr. Ampoma asked you a number of questions, and so did Mr. Rankin. Just to be clear, is this a production model or an economic model?
It is an economic model.
And does it need a continuous 400-foot interval of 30% oil saturation to work?
No, it does not need a continuous. You can use a net because the basis of it is for an economic model of a mass balance in and out.
And I'm going to pull up a couple of Empire exhibits. Okay. This is not what I want to show you. It's not. There we go. Can you see the slide there that I'm showing?
Yes, ma'am. You might make it just a little
Here,
bit zoom in.
okay. And this is Empire Exhibit L13, which was provided by Ops Geologic. Have you reviewed this and are you familiar with it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what does this exhibit show?
So this exhibit shows that, of their low case and their high cases of the net reservoir in the St. Andrews. That would be, you know, limited by log depths and things, but you can see where there's several cases and then you'd have to add the lower and upper together, but where you can very easily support the 400-foot thick net thickness of the 1,200-foot gross interval of the St. Andrews.
Okay, and then I've pulled up here Empire's Exhibit G3C, which was provided by New Tech. Have you reviewed this and are you familiar with it?
Yes, ma'am.
And what does it show?
This shows that, why they're all cut off by the end of the logs. You've got net thicknesses of over 500 foot shown here that is represented by New Tech.
So is that consistent with what's in your model as well?
Yes, ma'am. It does a very good job to support the 400-foot net.
Few more questions here. There have been a number of questions asked about Dr. Buckwalter's model. Do you recall those questions and about the cells that were adjusted?
Yes, ma'am.
And let me just put this in a different format. Can you tell me what this slide shows that I've got up on the screen?
So the doctor will probably understand this the best. This is your, layers of where we're talking about between, this is directly out of his model. And so it's all in evidence, everything already. And you can see where he poked the little holes in the barrier for the vertical perm. And you can see the values that he used in there from, I don't know, reading a few off, 375, 5, 125. And this is representative of those 99 blocks out of the 34,500 that are there. So this is the KZ but of layer 8, if you pull up the model.
This one.
It's in Daryl's original one. Oh, there it is.
Okay. Apologies, I feel like my computer has frozen. There we go. I can't even see my cursor. Apologies, let me just get this straightened out for one moment. Okay, Thank you, sorry. Mr. West, I'm showing another slide here regarding Dr. Buckwalter's model. Can you tell me what this shows?
Yes, ma'am. So this is if you took that one layer that's between the Grayburg and the St. Andrews, and then this is just taking the 99 blocks that were modified. And so you can see what how many cells were at the different permeabilities that he modified in there, right? So you can just clearly see that, 32 blocks, less than 10 millidarcies, and then, the stair steps up, and where there's only a block or two that he had to go all the way up to, a Darcy.
Thank you. This is my last few questions here for you. Let me just, okay. Mr. West, Mr. Rankin asked you a number of questions yesterday about 45Q tax credits. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
And he asked you about who receives the tax credits. Do you remember those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he referenced a part of your deposition where he indicated that you had said that the seller would receive the tax credits. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I've pulled up here your deposition testimony that I think Mr. Rankin was referring to, and it specifically starts at page 142. And I'll go ahead and read this. And his question at line 19 says, okay, in this comment here that there's an opportunity to purchase the CO2 at a reduced rate, is that referring to the tax benefits that you've incorporated into your economic analysis? And then can you tell me, what did you state?
I said correct. That's where you get a reduced rate because they receive the 45Q tax credit. The seller does.
Okay. And then can you read the next lines of the following page?
So you change it in the purchase price of the CO2.
Okay. So is what you were stating here that the seller receives the tax credits, but they pass them on to the buyer via contracts?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that's a negotiated contract term?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So it's not correct that you stated that the seller receives the tax credits and that there's no benefit to the buyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all of my questions for Mr. West. It does.
Thank you. And I think that concludes the testimony, Dr. West, does it not, for the record?
It does.
Yeah, all right. And if I'm correct, Dr. West is Empire's last witness.
That is true.
Okay, I wasn't sure I would ever get to the point of asking this question, but does Empire rest its case?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right. It's 11:15. That brings us, I guess, to Goodnight's case. But before we start with that, let me hear from you, Mr. Rosatos, and then also from the parties. I suppose the question is, would folks prefer to break for lunch, take an early lunch and come back early and commence Goodnight's case? Or would you prefer to start your case now? Mr. Rosatos, what are your thoughts?
Mr. Rankin, how long would it take for your first witness for you to start?
I haven't exactly timed it, Chair Rosatos. I think we would be able to do it within the 45 minutes remaining. I might just need a few minutes to get set up. My only concern about it is our termination date, time today. Our first witness will be Mr. Macbeth. He will be unable to rejoin us in person when we resume the hearing later this month. And so I would like to make sure I have as much time to try to get through his testimony while he's here as possible. So if we did take an early lunch, which is, I think, fine, because it's whether we do it now or later, it doesn't matter. But I think as long as we were able to come back around 12:15 or 12:30 to get started, that would be fine with me. And I guess it does make a next natural break, so there's no risk of, going longer with our introduction if it's slightly longer. So I guess my preference would be maybe to take a short lunch right now or a normal hour lunch break as long as we can get back at 12:30.
Okay, commissioners, are you okay with that?
Yes.
I'm fine with that also.
Okay, so
This is Zach Chandler. I
Oh,
just have
yes.
a basic question on the rules. I thought the direct was short, not 45 minutes. What are the rules on direct?
Well, there were no rules and there were a lot of long directs. So I didn't object to anything that was long at all. And I think if I may, I believe the case is very important and we didn't object or have any concerns about anybody spending extra time on the summaries.
On behalf of Empire, we don't have an objection to 45 minutes, and we've certainly, everyone's been very accommodating with our opening presentation of our witnesses.
And from OCD's position, goose and gander analysis would say, fair is fair and doesn't have an issue with that.
And Rice would echo what OCD said.
Same with pilot.
Okay, well, then we're already cutting into our abbreviated lunch hour. Let's call it quits now and be back and restart at 12:30.
So wait, I have a question, Mr. Chandler. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so yeah, let's take lunch now and we can come back, resume at 12:30.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.